Pontiac put the GTO, Firebird, and Trans Am on American streets. It survived oil shocks, efficiency rules, insurance pressure, and even the Aztec. But its fatal wound came on January 10, 1984, when General Motors reorganized 5 car divisions into 2 giant product groups. Pontiac kept its badge, its dealers, and its advertising. What it began to lose was the authority to decide what a Pontiac actually was. 25 years later, bankruptcy did not kill a healthy independent car company. It closed a brand that GM had spent decades turning into a label. That may sound harsh, because the reorganization did not erase Pontiac overnight. Some memorable Pontiacs came afterward. The decision was fatal for a slower reason. It weakened the one advantage Pontiac had used to reinvent itself before: a focused team with enough power to build cars around a clear identity. Pontiac itself had started as a reinvention. General Motors introduced it in 1926 as a lower-priced companion to Oakland. The new car became more popular than its parent. Oakland production ended in 1931, leaving Pontiac to take its place. The brand created to support another brand had become the survivor. But survival inside General Motors required a purpose. Chevrolet offered mass market value. Oldsmobile and Buick moved buyers upward. Cadillac sat at the top. Pontiac needed to be more than another rung on that ladder. By the middle 1950s, that purpose was unclear. Pontiac had a respectable reputation, but respectability was not enough in an America filling its highways with younger drivers. In 1956, Semon Bunky Knudsen took charge of the division and helped turn Pontiac toward performance. Chief engineer Pete Estes and a talented group of engineers made that shift tangible. For 1959, Pontiac widened the track of its full-size cars. The wheels moved outward, filling the body and giving the cars a lower, more planted stance. Wide track was excellent advertising because it described something drivers could see and feel. Pontiac was not merely claiming excitement. Its engineers had changed the car to support the claim. That connection between engineering and identity became Pontiac's real strength. The division could take shared General Motors ingredients and combine them with its own engines, suspension tuning, styling, and product choices. A Pontiac did not have to be completely unique underneath. It had to make a distinct promise and then keep it. The 1964 GTO showed what happened when that system worked. Pontiac offered a 389 cubic inch V8 in the intermediate Tempest Le Mans as an option package. General Motors now describes that car as the machine that started the muscle car era. Pontiac expected a limited run. Buyers responded with more than 32,000 sales in the first model year. The GTO was not simply a large engine in a smaller car. It was proof that people inside one division understood an audience before the corporate system did. The product, the name, the promotion, and the attitude arrived together. 3 years later, the Firebird gave Pontiac a pony car of its own. The Trans Am version eventually became one of the most recognizable performance names in America. This is the crucial point. Pontiac's golden years were not created by a badge alone. They came from repeated decisions made by people who were responsible for Pontiac as a complete automobile business. When the market changed, that team could change the brand with it. The 1970s tested that ability. Fuel prices rose. Federal emissions and safety requirements grew stricter. Insurance costs hurt traditional muscle cars. Pontiac could not keep living in 1964, but it did not simply surrender. The Firebird and Trans Am evolved into cultural icons, even as outright engine power fell. The Grand Prix built a strong personal luxury identity. Pontiac learned to sell handling, design, and attitude when raw horsepower became harder to deliver. Then General Motors changed the rules inside its own house. On January 10, 1984, GM announced that Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac would be consolidated into 2 major passenger car groups. Chevrolet, Pontiac, and GM of Canada went into one group. Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac went into the other. Body and assembly operations were folded into the new structure as well. Chairman Roger Smith said the purpose was to streamline engineering and manufacturing and improve quality. The logic was understandable. Japanese manufacturers were gaining ground with efficient factories, consistent quality, and shorter development cycles. GM's old system contained duplication. 5 divisions could develop similar cars, engines, and components while competing for the same customers. Consolidation promised lower cost and better coordination. But efficiency has a hidden price when a company sells several brands. The duplicated engineering groups were also the institutions that gave each division its memory, priorities, and authority. Pontiac's managers had once been able to ask a simple question: what should a Pontiac be? After the reorganization, larger product groups increasingly asked a different one: how many brands can use this program? That did not mean every Pontiac became identical to a Chevrolet. It did mean the badge was moving farther from the people controlling the basic car. A period report explained the new arrangement with a revealing example. A large Chevrolet could still be sold by Chevrolet dealers, but its development and manufacturing could belong to the large car group rather than Chevrolet itself. The showroom name remained. Ultimate product responsibility moved elsewhere. Academic research on GM's organization later described the reorganization as confusing and found that it did not noticeably improve product development. For Pontiac, the deeper problem was strategic. The division could still propose variations, tune suspensions, shape body panels, and create marketing, but it had less control over the expensive decisions that made a variation worth owning in the first place. The timing makes the story more painful because Pontiac still had creative momentum. The Fiero arrived for 1984 with a mid-engine layout, 2 seats, composite body panels, and its own space frame construction. The Detroit Historical Society calls it a radical approach to design and production. Early cars were compromised by the economy car mission and parts bin limitations imposed on the program, but Pontiac kept developing it. By 1988, the Fiero had received substantial chassis and brake improvements. Then production ended. The Fiero is not proof that the reorganization alone cancelled every good idea. Sales had declined, and the program carried real business problems. It is proof of something subtler. Pontiac still had engineers who wanted to create distinctive cars, but distinctive projects now had to survive a system built to reduce duplication. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, Pontiac fought to preserve its personality with what remained under its control. It used aggressive bodywork, red instrument lighting, suspension packages, and slogans about excitement. Some of those cars earned loyal followings. The Grand Prix became a recognizable performance sedan and coupe. The Firebird and Trans Am kept the V8 flame alive. Yet Pontiac's exclusive mechanical identity was fading. The old Pontiac V8 family had already disappeared by the early 1980s. Engines increasingly came from GM's common powertrain operations. Platforms were shared across more divisions. In some cases, the differences between a Pontiac and its corporate relatives were meaningful. In others, the changes looked like styling, trim, and advertising applied after the biggest decisions had already been made. That is when brand overlap becomes dangerous. Sharing a platform is not automatically badge engineering. Great brands can use common architecture and still create different experiences. The danger appears when a brand cannot control enough of the final car to justify its place in the showroom. Pontiac's answer often became visual aggression. More cladding, more scoops, more wings, more promises of excitement. At its best, that attitude produced cars enthusiasts loved. At its worst, it made ordinary hardware look as if it were wearing a costume. The brand was being asked to project a stronger identity with fewer independent tools. The 2001 Aztec became the symbol of that problem, but it was not the fatal decision. Its unusual proportions and styling made it an easy target, yet one failed model does not erase an 80-year automobile brand. Pontiac had survived unpopular cars before. The deeper damage was that GM could no longer answer what Pontiac alone was allowed to build after the Aztec was gone. There were real comeback attempts. The 2004 GTO brought rear-wheel drive and V8 power back by adapting the Australian Holden Monaro. The Solstice gave Pontiac a compact 2-seat roadster on GM's Kappa platform. The G8, based on another Holden, delivered the kind of rear-wheel drive performance sedan American Pontiac fans had been requesting. Those cars proved the audience still recognized a convincing Pontiac. they also revealed how dependent the brand had become. Its most credible modern performance cars came from shared global programs or another GM division on the other side of the world. Pontiac could choose, tune, and sell them, but it no longer controlled a complete product pipeline capable of sustaining the brand. The G8 arrived for the 2008 model year, just as the American auto industry entered its worst crisis in generations. The Solstice was still young. Pontiac suddenly had some of its most appealing cars in years, but product quality was no longer the only question. General Motors was burning cash, seeking federal support, and preparing a restructuring plan that would decide which brands deserved future investment. In February of 2009, GM told the government and investors that it would concentrate resources on Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, and GMC. Pontiac would be reduced to a highly focused niche brand within the Buick-Pontiac GMC retail channel. That proposal was already in admission. Pontiac was no longer being defended as a full-line division with a future of its own. The plan was judged insufficient. GM returned with a more aggressive version. In its April filings, the company stated there would be no planned investment for Pontiac and that the brand would be phased out by the end of 2010. GM also planned to cut nameplates, dealers, factories, and structural costs on a scale that left little room for sentiment. This is where a persistent myth should be separated from the record. The federal government did not publish a list ordering GM to kill Pontiac by name. The government demanded a viable restructuring in exchange for continued support. GM revised its own plan and selected 4 core American brands. Pontiac was not one of them. Bankruptcy was the death certificate. The 1984 reorganization was the fatal wound. That claim does not mean Pontiac would have survived every market change if its old divisional engineering structure had remained untouched. GM still faced excess factories, too many dealers, severe debt, foreign competition, fuel economy pressure, and collapsing sales. Pontiac also made product and marketing mistakes of its own. But when the survival meeting came, Chevrolet could be defended as GM's mass market foundation. Cadillac was the luxury flagship. GMC owned a clear truck identity. Buick had a premium position and international scale. Pontiac had nostalgia, several good recent cars, and a promise of excitement. What it no longer had was an independent machine for turning that promise into a durable future. That was the consequence of the earlier decision. GM had spent years removing the costly overlap among its divisions, then discovered that the overlap had contained much of their reason to exist. Pontiac's autonomy looked inefficient when times were stable. Its absence became fatal when every brand had to prove it could stand on its own. The final irony is that Pontiac began by replacing its parent, Oakland, because buyers found the new brand more relevant. 83 years later, Pontiac could not make the same escape. It was no longer a smaller car company inside GM with the authority to outgrow an old role. It was a name waiting for product assignments from a corporation that no longer needed the name. Collectors have reversed that judgment in the only way they can. A wide-track Catalina, an early GTO, a Firebird Trans Am, a Grand Prix, or a well-sorted Fiero now represents something more specific than another old GM car. Each preserves a moment when Pontiac's engineers and product people were allowed to make a clear argument about what driving should feel like. Pontiac was not killed because Americans stopped loving excitement. The brand died because General Motors gradually separated the Pontiac promise from the authority required to keep it. By 2009, eliminating the badge looked like simplification. In 1984, taking away the division's independence had looked like efficiency. If you could bring back one Pontiac exactly as its original team intended it, which would it be? GTO, Firebird Trans Am, Grand Prix, Fiero, Solstice, or G8? Share your choice in the comments and tell us what made that Pontiac different from everything else in the showroom.